Beyond Reason Radio.
Well, I know you all were waiting for Beyond Reason Radio this week because you had to get Yaffee's take, my take, on what some people are calling elderly abuse, or, you know, what is also known as the Mueller testimony. Because after a while, it did just seem like they were just beating up the poor old man who was just, he just wanted to go home and eat his pudding, you know? And they had to drag him out there for, what, 7 hours?
He certainly did not want to be there, that's for sure.
Would you have wanted to be there?
No.
For that? You're just like, I just want my sponge bath, and they're taking me go to Congress. Oh, man, this is Beyond Reason Radio. It's Friday, so we're just a little punchy, I guess. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason, the voice of truth in a world that is beyond reason. We're on until 9 p.m. tonight, right here on News Radio 93.1 WFLA. But if you miss any of the show, catch the podcast anywhere the podcasts are available. And, of course, as always, Mr. Tom Benson is joining me. He's not in a good mood today.
No, I am in a good mood. This is the best hour of the entire week.
Yeah, don't lie to me. But
no, it is. It's because it's the last hour. I got to be here.
Exactly. Didn't you say earlier that people aren't as productive at the end of the week?
That's correct. Monday is the peak.
That explains the production value of this show.
And then the rest of the week is downhill.
But you're in a bad mood because your team, your baseball team.
Oh, yeah. My Yankees are losing again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm worried that this show's just not going to be on the air after a while. He's just going to walk out and turn it on automation if the Yankees don't do better.
Talk me in off the ledge.
So the more I think about this whole Mueller testimony, and not just the Mueller testimony, but the Mueller investigation, the special counsel, the Russia stuff, I mean, okay, the show's called Beyond Reason. Maybe I say terms beyond reason too much, but it is beyond reason. But more than that, I think it was just bad for the country. I think this whole thing has been just bad for the country. Really. Now, why is that? Because I don't believe anybody in Congress actually cares about Russian influence. If that's really the threat here, if that's really what we should be investigating here, is Russian influence in our elections, don't you think this would have been handled completely differently? I don't think so. I think so. Yeah. Tom Benson, you're chomping at the bit when I said that.
It's all about getting to Trump any way they can.
It really seems like that. And you know what one of the best examples of that to me is?
Mm-hmm.
When you're watching the Mueller testimony,
mm-hmm.
they gave everyone, all the congressmen to ask him, they gave them 5 minutes.
Right.
How in the world are you actually going to conduct a real committee hearing to get answers on a report that's supposed to be about national security? How are you supposed to really get anything done and anything of value out of it in 5 minutes, in questioning 5 minutes?
And most of them don't even care about getting an answer. They just want to make a statement and grandstand.
Yeah, exactly.
And make a position point.
I mean, I just thought about that. I'm like, okay, you give everyone 5 minutes. Oh, they give the Democrat maybe 6, and then the Republican 4. And they just want Mueller to say, basically, so Trump did bad things. Did Trump do bad things? Was he a bad man? Yeah. Did he obstruct justice? Well, I can't come to a conclusion on that. It's absurd. The whole thing, I think, is absurd because I don't think the goal of any of this was to actually find out if Russia is trying to influence our elections and if that's really a national security problem. All you have to do is read the report and show that the whole investigation was about Trump. And the whole reason the special counsel was appointed was because Trump fired James Comey. So the Democrats screamed, we needed some kind of special counsel. And this is all about trying to get Trump. It's more obvious than ever. And one of the biggest reasons why it's obvious is because when you look at the report and then they asked Mueller, Mueller, what do you think about Fusion GPS? That outfit that hired the Steele guy who went over and talked to a bunch of Russians and got a bunch of bad info on Trump.
Yeah.
Couldn't that have been maybe a part of the Russians' campaign to interfere in our elections?
One would think. Yeah.
Trying to get involved. That's out of my purview. What's a fusion GPS?
Yeah.
I have a GPS on my car. Is that what you're talking about? Where's my pudding? So, it's just like, come on. And I'm thinking, okay, if we were really focused on trying to find out if Russia is really, influencing our elections, really trying to sow political divide, if we're really trying to find that out, wouldn't that have actually been some of the focus in some of this? No. Half the report is about if Trump obstructed justice. They admit at the outset, well, we can't come to a conclusion on if there was evidence of a crime of Trump obstructing justice because of our opinion, and we can indict him, blah, 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 blah. Then why are you doing 7-page report on it?
Right. Case closed. Let's move on. Nothing to see here.
If you come at the outset that you can't come up to a conclusion, then what is this about? What is this whole thing even about? Why do we even have this special counsel? We have it because they want to get after Trump. I'm more convinced in that than ever. Now, before we get more into that whole topic, I do want to give kudos to someone who hit the nail on the head when it came to the Mueller testimony. I just happened to be listening to Mark Levin. He does another radio show, conservative. He has a show on Fox News and stuff like that, conservative host, Mark Levin. I'm going to be listening to a show the day after Mueller gave his statement. Remember, he gave a press conference that he was ending the special counsel's office, and he didn't want to be in front of Congress and all of this stuff, and that was supposed to be the end of it, and he was going to go off and retire or go to the Sandals Resort or something. I don't know. And so that was supposed to be the end of it. And then I'm listening to Mark Levin that day or that night, and he predicted why, Mueller didn't want to testify in front of Congress. And it turns out he was right on the money. Here it is.
By now, you're obviously aware that Robert Mueller had an 8 or 9 minute speech he made. No questions. Wandered off into the sunset, no doubt retiring to Boca Raton, Florida. Isn't that where everybody goes? Says he's not going to answer any questions to Congress. By the way, as you'll see, I think there's a reason for this. I think he's somewhat feeble. I really do. I don't think he's really running that office. I don't think he's capable of answering rationally, effectively, questions put to him, mostly by the Republicans.
Was he not right on the money that day? I mean, he basically hit the nail on the head that Mueller really did not want to testify because he's old and feeble and not all there. And that he knew he would not look good being challenged by members of Congress, and that it would be revealed that he was not really running that investigation. I mean, that was the most obvious thing that came out of yesterday, is there is no way this guy was completely in charge of that investigation. So the question is, who was in charge? The question is, what is this all about then? The question is, why is Robert Mueller even there? So one person who had a really good opinion on this, in my opinion, Andrew McCarthy, former prosecutor, also works for the National Review now. He talks on Fox News a lot. I happened to catch some of his podcasts. He does a podcast for the National Review. I want to play some of what he said because he was a good voice of reason on all of this, and he has been since the beginning. He basically predicted a lot of what was coming out of this investigation from the beginning. I want to go through some of this, and we'll stop it as we're going through. He talks about Mueller, how this was a disaster, but who was in charge of the investigation, and why all of this is a problem. Here it is, Andrew McCarthy.
This is not a good investigation. It's been a bad investigation for the country, and the way he has run it is not just a hands-off way. It now seems, I think two things are true. Number one, he was basically running interference more than he was running the investigation. In that, Trump kept saying the 18 angry Democrats or 14 angry, however I lose count of how many it is. But it is a fact that he recruited activist Democrats overwhelmingly to be in this politically fraught investigation. And when anyone had the temerity to point that out, the answer to that always was, well, but you have rock-ribbed Republican Bob Mueller is there who's actually running the show. And we now see that he wasn't running the show at all. Okay, stop right there. So he points out there, which is obvious to everyone now, Mueller, it's inconceivable, he said that earlier too, Mueller, it's inconceivable that Mueller was in charge of this investigation. There's no way. I mean, he was kind of a figurehead, maybe ran interference here and there. But the defense, and he's right, was always Mueller's a Republican. He's the straight edge, by-the-book guy. He's going to do this exactly right and all this stuff. And you find out that, no, he wasn't really running this. It was the people under him, the 12 angry Democrats that Trump was talking about. So that's a big problem right there. And then Andrew McCarthy continues on here, makes another good point. And the second point is, and this goes not only to the constitution of his staff, but also the investigation itself. We've pointed out a number of times, you're not supposed to have a special counsel unless the Justice Department is so conflicted that they can't investigate the case in the normal way. So what happened here? They brought in Bob Mueller from the outside because he's from the outside, right? He's not in the Justice Department. And what does he do? He recruits a bunch of people who are not only activist Democrats, they're high-ranking officials in the Obama Justice Department that conducted the Trump investigation before Mueller came along. So, again, I ask, what in the world did we need to have a special counsel for? And now we know that this investigation was run by the most conflicted part of the conflicted Justice Department. I mean, the whole thing is just a farce. I think it's exactly right. More and more every day I realize that he's exactly right there. So what happens is we decide we need a special counsel because he's going to be beyond politics. The DOJ is too conflicted. They were investigating Trump. So the DOJ is against Trump politically and they're Obama holdovers. So we need a special counsel to come in and make it fair. So we have the special counsel come in. And what does that special counsel do? He gets a bunch of those people from the Justice Department that were Obama holdovers who were conflicted and puts them in the special counsel's office. And it's like, well, then why did we do this? We basically had the DOJ that was already against Trump and already investigating him. We just brought him into the special counsel's office and we said, well, this is the answer now. Well, this is getting at the truth. Nobody cares about the truth, it seems like. As I said before, if this was really about investigating Russian influence on our election, and Mueller said that at the beginning of his thing, oh, we really need to pay attention to what Russia is doing, then why don't we pay attention to everything Russia is doing? But notice how they only cared about what Russia was doing with Trump and trying to make that connection. Now, in a second, I'm going to go over the other big problem with this whole Mueller report and Mueller testimony. Andrew McCarthy also made a good point on that. We'll get to that and much more Beyond Reason stuff today. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I am your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Subscribe to the Beyond Reason podcast today on your Stitcher app and hear the voice of reason anytime. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
So we are still talking about the Beyond Reason Mueller report, Mueller investigation, Mueller testimony, which, as we mentioned before, was more like poor elderly abuse. Poor guy. I mean, you watch that and it's like you almost feel sorry for the guy. This is Beyond Reason Radio. As I said, we're on till 9 p.m. If you miss any of the show, check out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. We're also on Facebook Live as well, so you can like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page and catch it there. You can also text the show at 23680, or you can follow me on Twitter, which you definitely should follow me on Twitter, at PMOWFLA, or just search Michael Yaffee. So we've been talking about the Mueller report. And the biggest problem I had, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is the fact that I still don't believe any of this is really about finding the truth and finding out whether Russia is involved in our elections and how to stop them from doing that and focusing on that. And I gave you the reasons for that. But the other big problem, which I mentioned in one of my commentaries earlier this week on PM Orlando, has to do with the premise of this whole investigation to begin with. The premise was, from the outset, that they could not determine if Trump committed a crime. So if they had enough evidence, well, they weren't even going to start to see if there was enough evidence if he committed a crime because of the OLC opinion, which states you can't indict a sitting president. So if you're not going to be able to come to a conclusion on whether Trump committed a crime, then why are you doing this investigation to begin with? It's kind of confusing them. Why are you there? Well, they believed that it was their job to come up with enough evidence to exonerate Trump. So in the first part of the report, you notice they did come to a conclusion when it came to conspiracy with Russia or collusion. They said there's not enough evidence to say that Trump was a part of a criminal conspiracy. That's a conclusion, but that's only a conclusion on exoneration. So they can say, well, we're going to investigate to make sure he did not commit a crime, but we can't investigate to make sure he did, so they don't come up with a conclusion on obstruction. It's confusing as I'm talking about this now, but it's backwards. And a lot of other people have made this point, and they're right. You have a presumption of innocence, and then you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone is guilty. And prosecutors have to believe there's enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to charge someone. They don't go into an investigation on the premise of trying to exonerate someone because exoneration is the standard. Innocence is first. You're innocent until proven guilty. But this was backwards. And maybe this is the fault of how the special counsels are supposed to work. Maybe this is why we shouldn't have special counsels like this. But it's a problem. And when you have an investigation that starts on that premise, you're basically leaving this giant hole, this giant gray area that will be used by politicians till the end of time, especially till the end of Trump's presidency, to argue this point back and forth. Because they're going to say, well, there's stuff in the report that we can use. Oh, there's stuff in the report that we can use. Both sides will use this. And so the Mueller, it's amazing. The purpose of the Mueller report, the Mueller investigation, was to find out the truth on this stuff. But the result of it was more confusion, more argument, and more debate. Is the opposite of the purpose of having it. So why did we have this in the first place? Well, it's all politics, as I mentioned before. Now, I played some cuts of Andrew McCarthy earlier in the show. He's a former prosecutor, works for the National Review. He was on Fox News right after this testimony, and he was talking about what I just mentioned. And I think he's exactly right. Here's what he said.
I think one of the more curious positions that Mueller took is that the investigation was beyond his purview. When he was asked about Fusion GPS, he's asked about Glenn Simpson, asked about all this stuff. He's like, that's someone else is looking at that. I never had an investigation in my life where you didn't need to know how the agents collected the information in your investigation. Commonly, the defense lawyers will put the government on trial in a criminal case. You need to know all that stuff in order to go into court and be competent.
So there was 2 points he made there. Once they were like saying they didn't need to know that stuff. And then he was saying, look, he was asked about the Steele dossier. He was asked about Fusion GPS. He was asked about how the investigation started. And Mueller said, that's beyond my purview. I can't know that. And he's like, as a prosecutor, I would never have conducted an investigation this way. And then for him to not come to a conclusion on obstruction, you're just leaving this giant gray area out there. Well, Congress already had that gray area. And by the way, when it comes to obstruction, the Democrats are going to keep harping on this, that Trump somehow obstructed justice. Now, there are things in the report that don't make Trump look good. There are some things in the report that make you think, oh man, he was really annoyed at this investigation. But would all of this hold up in court? The Democrats know it wouldn't. Why? Because you have to have criminal intent or corrupt intent. That's what I was looking for. You have to have corrupt intent. That's a high threshold. They're not going to be able to prove that Trump had corrupt intent when it comes to this investigation and when it comes to obstruction of justice. They know this. And they also know that by doing things like calling for Mueller to be fired or firing Comey, you can't, or making things on Twitter, you can't say the head of the executive branch obstructed justice when he does an executive, something under his own executive authority. You can't say that. That doesn't work under the president of the United States. And the Democrats know this. They know this. So they're just going to keep pushing this mainly for political reasons. Now, I will say this. I think the biggest mistake by the Democrats politically from the beginning of the Trump administration, for the past 2 years, is they have been trying to portray Trump as some sort of evil mastermind who's like Putin or who's like Hitler, who is really manipulating things to try to take control of the country and maybe even the world or something like that. That he's somehow a big threat to democracy. And then when you look at Trump's Twitter and you look at things Trump says and you look at things Trump does, I think the majority of the American people are like, no, I don't think so. I don't think this guy is a reality TV show host, if anything. This guy is not some kind of evil mastermind trying to take over the world. People are not going to buy it. So the Democrats, they're on that because of the woke Twitter world and all that stuff. That's why they do that, for their woke Twitter base. And they've been trying to push this. And the American people, they're not going to buy it. I think if the Democrats were smart, they might have went down more of the road of he's incompetent, he's out of his league, he says things he shouldn't say, he's not the smartest guy or something like that. That might have been smarter politically, even though I don't think that would have worked either. But to come out and act like he's some kind of evil mastermind, I don't buy it. I just never bought it. I never bought it from the beginning when all of this started. It never connected with me. I'm like, are you guys watching the same person I'm watching? Do you guys see what this guy says sometimes on Twitter? You think this guy is the guy who's going to take over the world? So the American people, they just don't buy it. So the Democrats can keep going down this road, but I don't think it's going to work for them. I really don't. I think people are like, yeah, he's a little unorthodox, but hey, he loves the country and the economy's doing well. So maybe we'll stick with him. Now, I want to move on. Speaking of the road the Democrats are going down, Ilhan Omar in this radical progressive left wing of the Democrat Party. Ilhan Omar said something in an interview, actually before she was elected, that resurfaced. And she's got a lot of criticism for it. But I noticed that most people are not playing her comments fully in context. So I want to do that. And when you do, it's actually worse, if you can believe that. So we'll do that next, and we'll have a voice of reason on that as well, and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Listen to the latest episodes of Beyond Reason. Download the podcast at Spreaker.com. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Yes, welcome back to the show. This is the conscience in your ear, telling you the difference between right or wrong, or as Carl Jackson says, the conscience of WFLA. He might be right. I should say the conscience of podcasts, because you can also get the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Just the conscience of, I don't know, the internet, the radio, everything for you. There you go. I'm the angel, the good angel on one side. And I don't know, maybe Tom Benson's the devil on the other side.
Thanks.
I'm just kidding. No, Tom Benson does a great job. So one thing that's been getting a lot of attention is this interview with Ilhan Omar that she did on Al Jazeera. Now, it's actually an older interview. It's when she was running for Congress. And this interview resurfaced and got a lot of attention because she seems to be bashing white people, especially white men. And, she deserves a lot of the criticism, but I noticed that most people were not really playing this in context. So I went back and actually listened to more of the interview, and it actually has more problems than you would think. when it comes to this stuff. So I wanted to play this in context. We'll go through it and talk about what's beyond reason in it. So here it is.
A lot of conservatives in particular would say that the rise in Islamophobia is a result not of hate, but of fear, a legitimate fear, they say, of quote-unquote jihadist terrorism, whether it's Fort Hood or San Bernardino or the recent truck attack in New York. What do you say to them?
I would say our country should be more fearful of white men across our country, because they are actually causing most of the deaths within this country. And so if fear was the driving force of policies to keep America safe, Americans safe inside of this country, we should be profiling, monitoring, and creating policies to fight the radicalization of white men.
Okay, stop right there. So a couple points I need to make on this. First, the premise is kind of dumb. The rise of Islamophobia. It is true that there have been, some hate crimes against Muslims in the country, a little bit of a rise, but I mean, in the big scheme of things, it's nothing. This country is very, very tolerant. It just, except, the progressive left is not tolerant of Christians and conservatives and Republicans, but overall, most people in this country are tolerant of most religions. It's not some kind of epidemic of Islamophobia in this country. But then she answers the question, well, if we're going to go down that road, we really need to fear white men more because they're committing most of the deaths in this country. Now, factually, there's a lot of problems with that, but overall, it's just a dumb comment, because what she was really doing is whataboutism. So we're trying to talk about radical jihadism, radical Islamism, which is a problem not only here, but across the world. I mean, it's way worse across the world. There's a reason why Christians are being slaughtered across Africa and Asia, maybe in bigger numbers than in the history of Christianity. It's a huge problem. But in America, it's a problem, too, of radicalization. And she's like, well, if we're going to look at that, and I'm not saying, some are saying she actually wants to profile white men. I don't think it's what she was saying. But her point is, we should really fear them. But it's not a fair point, because white men make up 31% of the U.S. population. And so, of course, overall, they're going to commit more crimes because they're most of the people. Muslims make up 1% of the population. And yet, how many radical Islamic terrorist attacks have we had in the past few years? But even that doesn't really matter, because we're not talking about a race. We're talking about an ideology. But what she does is, when she's asked about this radical ideology, instead of confronting it, which is a problem. I mean, factually, the biggest terrorist attack in our history was on 9/11, which killed more people than Pearl Harbor. So if you're going to talk about other, white men causing most, no, compared to 9/11, no. There has been a rise of white supremacist attacks in this country in the past couple of years. It's still a very, very small portion of the white population in this country, first off. Second off, nobody's condoning that kind of behavior. Most white people aren't saying, oh, well, they're okay. We're not defending that behavior. We're also calling out that radical ideology. In fact, I did on this show. After one of them happened, I said we need to be just as tough on radical white supremacists as we do on radical Islam. But we don't ignore one because, oh, well, white people in this country are worse. It's a stupid argument. It's whataboutism, and it's not even factually correct by math and the numbers. So, but this continues on here, and she's challenged a little bit, and she continues on with her, white supremacist, this whataboutism. Here it is.
But most of the funding and attention, even under Obama, obviously went towards Muslim communities. One of those communities is in Minnesota, your state, the Somali American community in Minnesota, where I think over the past few years, more than 20 young Somali Americans have left to go and fight for ISIL or Al-Shabaab or one of these quote-unquote jihadist groups abroad. That's a real threat, obviously. No one's pretending it's not a threat. So what do you do about it?
But I mean, I think, like I said, the focus of our policies should be about keeping Americans safe, keeping us domestically safe, and where we actually find a solution is looking at our foreign policy, looking at how we are engaging with the members of these communities, and the kind of rhetoric, right, like that is being spewed out of leaders within our city halls, within our state capitals, and within our nation's capital.
Okay, pause right there. Tom Benson picked up on this immediately.
It's our fault.
That is exactly what she did, is it not? This is why I say in context, this is actually worse. Because the interviewer actually made a good point. Well, okay, you're poor, whites have commit crimes too and commit murder and stuff too, but there is a problem of radical jihadism even from your country of origin, and isn't that something we should deal with? Isn't that a real problem? And Ilhan Omar immediately shifts away from focusing on that problem and goes and says, well, the real problem is the United States foreign policy, rhetoric coming out of our countries, and it's our fault this is happening. We need to look at our foreign policy and our rhetoric and stuff we're doing, and it's nonsense. She cannot, for some reason, call out radical Islam. She can't do it. She refuses to do it. You can be a Muslim and call out the radical sect within your religion. In fact, as a Muslim, you almost have more of a responsibility to do that. As a Christian, I will call out radical sects in Christianity that are not practicing the faith correctly. But she can't do that. That's why people question her real motives. It's not our fault that this radical ideology is spreading. This is stuff that, some libertarians point out. It's our foreign policy that caused this. It's nonsense. Why can't you just actually focus on the problem, which is the radical ideology? She can't do it. She gets defensive. So she goes to whataboutism, blames white people for stuff, and then blames America for stuff. Notice how I said in context this is actually worse? I believe there's more, right? Let's continue on.
Some would say that's true. There's some really bad rhetoric coming from politicians, security leaders, etc. But also a lot of bad rhetoric coming from Muslim community leaders, imams, etc. Right. Is that fair?
I think both of those statements could be true, and I think it just goes to show what happens when you have segments within communities that are using fear and hate to mobilize their base. And it is important for us to actually have a conversation about what kind of communities we are trying to build and what this nation actually stands for.
She can't do it. She can't do it. She can't call out radical Islam. She made it seem like, well, it's just like any hate in any community. We all want good community. We're not talking about that. We're talking about radical Islamism. It's a problem. What should we do about it? She doesn't have an answer. She has these general things like, well, it's not really a problem. And if you think it's a problem, you just hate Muslims. No, that's not true. It's absurd. So, like I said, when you actually watch, I was kind of shocked because I hadn't heard all of this. I just heard the part when she talked about white men, and I'm like, wow. In context, this is almost worse when it comes to that. What do you think, Tom Benson? You have a lot to say, it seems like.
Well, it's going to go round and round because you're right, she can't admit it, and she won't admit it.
Yeah.
And others will come to her defense, and then she'll be a victim.
Yeah, well, that's the playbook of the left every time. Now, a good voice of reason on this was Dana Loesch. She has a syndicated radio show. She comes on Fox News a lot. She was on Fox and Friends earlier this week talking about this, and she's exactly right. Here's what she said.
this is what the biggest point that she misses is. Jihadism is not a race. Jihadism is not an ethnicity. Jihadism is an ideology. There have been white jihadists. There are jihadists of color. That's the biggest thing. That's why it's also incredibly difficult for law enforcement to investigate and to fight. And I would just think that in the interest of uniting the country and in the interest of uniting voters, that maybe she would perhaps focus on that instead of constantly trying to advance these discriminatory policies and these arguments through the lens of race.
They can't do that, though. They can't do that. I mean, it's true. We weren't talking about race. We're talking about a radical ideology, and she immediately deflected to race. She can't do it, and she can't call out the ideology. Do you think that Amazon and Facebook and Google should be broken up for antitrust reasons? Well, the DOJ is looking into it, and, I think it's beyond reason. We'll talk about that. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you heart Beyond Reason Radio, listen to the Beyond Reason Radio podcast on iHeartRadio. Just download the iHeartRadio app and search Beyond Reason Radio. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
You know, I don't know if this has to do with me being the conscience in your ear, but have you noticed that more and more people are growing beards? Like mine? No. I feel like I was the first one to do this. You know, I just saw a clip of like Jimmy Fallon, and he didn't have a full beard. He had just, it was kind of growing a little bit. I've just noticed more and more people have the beards. And I'm like, I had this years ago. I was like the first one to start this trend of really growing the beards. And all of a sudden, everyone else has a beard now.
Well, you're a trendsetter, you know?
I guess so. I mean, when you're the conscience of WFLA.
I want to be just like him.
People want to be just like me.
Yeah.
So I wonder if I shave my beard, if everyone else would stop, growing it, if everyone else would follow suit. I should do an experiment or something. I can't, though. The girlfriend loves the beard. She won't let me shave it.
Well.
She would be, I'm not even kidding.
Your life is over.
Plus, I look like a chubby baby without a beard. I'm just saying, a fat, chubby baby without a beard. So another thing I want to get to real quick here, because it really bothers me, and it's coming out of the Trump administration. There's a story about how Attorney General Bill Barr is opening up a broad antitrust inquiry into Facebook, Google, and Amazon. And I'm thinking, and I've talked about this before, but I don't understand it. I mean, I do and I don't. It's just, why? Why are we doing this? Now, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, was on Fox earlier this week, and he was asked about this. Actually, it wasn't Fox, it was CNBC. He was asked about this, and this is what he said.
Well, let me just say, I think it's very good that the Attorney General is going to look into this. I think it's an important issue, and I look forward to him reporting back to the president and hearing his recommendations. I think, as you know, if you look at Amazon, although there's certain benefits to it, they've destroyed the retail industry across the United States, so there's no question they've limited competition. There's areas where they've really hurt small businesses. So I don't think this is a one-size-fits-all, and I don't have an opinion going in other than I think it's absolutely right that the Attorney General is looking into these issues, and I look forward to listening to his recommendations to the president.
This is the Treasury Secretary who doesn't really seem to understand economics. The whole idea that Amazon and Google and Facebook are monopolies that need to be broken up, there's no proof of that. There just isn't. When he talks about, some retail has suffered because of Amazon, and some small businesses have suffered because of Amazon. Well, that's because of competition. That's the opposite of a monopoly. It's because Amazon offers a better service and better products at better prices, and people chose to use Amazon instead of retail. It's not like Amazon has such a monopoly that they're just charging outrageous prices and we still have to go there. There's no evidence of that. The only reason Amazon is winning this fight is because they're winning the competition better. They're competing better. Facebook is the same way. Google is the same way. There are other search engines out there. You know what happens every time I use another search engine? If I try another one, I hate it because it doesn't work as well. So I go back to Google. It's not because there's a monopoly. And what really bothers me about this is I think that the reason why the Trump administration is doing this is for political reasons. I think they don't like the politics of those companies, the leaders of those companies. Because a lot of them, Bezos, Zuckerberg, they're liberals, they're leftists. And because we don't like their politics, Trump thinks he'll look good with some of his support in the Tucker Carlsons of the world if he goes after them. And I just think it's a bad precedent because you're now using your Justice Department. This is stuff we criticized Obama for, and you're kind of doing the same thing now. I don't think there's any real evidence for some kind of antitrust here. And Mnuchin is asked about something in this next cut I have here, which totally makes my point, actually, on this. Here it is.
Is Amazon's competition any different than what Walmart used to be a decade ago?
It is different. In a way, it's the same, and in a way, it's different. I mean, people had those concerns about Walmart. I think, as you see, Walmart developed a business where small businesses could continue to compete with them. And look, Walmart ceded a lot of the retail business to Amazon. So these are important issues that I look forward to hearing from the Attorney General.
Yeah, he didn't really have an answer for that, but he was asked about, Walmart used to be the big one. Is this the same argument there? Now, why is Walmart not seen as the dominant one anymore? Is it because the government got involved? No. The reason why Walmart is no longer seen as the big dominant one anymore is Amazon came around and competed with Walmart. And that actually made Walmart a better company because Walmart had to redo their stores, had to redo their website. They now have where you can have it delivered to your car or all of this stuff or, delivered to your house. It made them a better thing because they had to compete with Amazon. I remember when everyone was like, Walmart is such a big monopoly. They're destroying business in this country. Now, all of a sudden, Walmart was losing business, and we're going to go after the other one. It's competition. I remember when they said the same things about Microsoft, and now Microsoft, all of a sudden, Apple came along and destroyed Microsoft, and the government had to get in and try to break up Microsoft. That's not why Microsoft got smaller. It's because of competition. Amazon, and talk about small businesses. Yeah, there are some small businesses or retail that might be hurt by Amazon. But there's also a lot of small businesses that use Amazon on a daily basis to help their business. And they love Amazon. And there's also small businesses that sell on Amazon. This is why it's wrong for the government to get involved in this stuff. It just is. Facebook owns social media. You know who wishes they tried to get into social media and weren't successful was Google. Google came out with Google Plus to compete with Facebook. They're big. They could have done it, but they didn't offer a good enough product that people wanted. So people stayed on Facebook. Now people are going to Snapchat and Instagram. This whole thing, and that's why it gets to the point that I'm really actually disturbed by this because I really think more than economics, this is about politics. And I don't think we should be using the Department of Justice as sort of a weapon against companies just because we disagree with the CEO's politics. That's just my opinion on that. Wow, it's a fast hour. Well, we covered a lot, though, on this edition of Beyond Reason. But if you missed any of the show, make sure to catch out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available, like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page. Follow me on Twitter at PMOWFLA. I should be back next week, hopefully. And, well, catch you guys then.